saw them switch the folder. 5 words whispered by a 5-year-old girl. 5 words that would stop a billionaire in his tracks and expose a betrayal worth $9 billion. But here's what breaks my heart, and what makes this story so powerful. That little girl wasn't supposed to be there. She was the daughter of a cleaning lady, sitting quietly in a corner, trying to be invisible. And those 2 men in expensive suits? They never even glanced at her. They thought no one was watching. They were wrong. This is the true story of how the smallest voice in the room became the loudest. How a child's honesty saved thousands of families. And how one whispered truth changed everything, not just for a company, but for one man who'd forgotten how to see. Stay with me, because what happens next will remind you why speaking up, even when you're scared, even when you're small, even when nobody thinks you matter, is the bravest thing anyone can do. This is Emma's story, and it starts in the most unlikely place. Welcome to StorySphere. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Let me tell you a story that will restore your faith in the power of honesty. It's about a little girl named Emma, just 5 years old, who changed the life of one of the richest men in the world. And she did it with just one sentence. This happened in downtown Chicago, in one of those massive glass towers that touched the clouds. The building belonged to Richardson Global, a company worth billions. Inside, everything was perfect. Marble floors so shiny you could see your reflection, expensive paintings on every wall, and people in suits rushing around looking important. But Emma didn't belong there. Not really. She was the daughter of a cleaning lady, a woman named Grace, who worked the night shift scrubbing floors and emptying trash bins after everyone else went home. Grace was a single mother who worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Life wasn't easy, but she never complained. She taught Emma something simple but powerful. Always tell the truth, no matter what. That particular afternoon, Emma's babysitter got sick. Grace had no choice but to bring her daughter to work. She begged her supervisor, promised that Emma would sit quietly in a corner and wouldn't cause any trouble. The supervisor reluctantly agreed, and Grace found a chair for Emma in a hallway on the 15th floor, far from where the important people worked. Emma sat there in her favorite red dress, her legs swinging because they couldn't reach the floor. She promised her mama she'd be good, that she'd be invisible. But being invisible is hard when you're 5 years old and the whole world feels like an adventure. She watched people walk by in their fancy clothes, heard phones ringing in distant offices, and saw the sunlight dancing on the shiny floors. She imagined she was a princess in a castle made of glass. To pass the time, she counted the lights on the ceiling and tried to guess what important things happened behind all those closed doors. Then something happened that would change everything. 2 men came rushing down the hallway, their footsteps echoing loud in the quiet afternoon. They were dressed in expensive suits, but something about them made Emma feel uncomfortable. They kept looking over their shoulders like they were afraid someone might see them. One man was tall and nervous, constantly wiping sweat from his forehead. The other was shorter, holding a folder with a bright red stripe across it. Emma watched them, staying perfectly still. In her 5 years of life, she'd learned that adults didn't notice children when they wanted to hide. So she became a shadow, barely breathing, just watching. "Hurry up," the tall man whispered, his voice shaking. "He'll be back any minute." I know," the shorter one replied, opening the red folder with trembling hands. "This has to look perfect." Emma saw him pull out a stack of white papers and stuff them into his jacket pocket. Then he took out different papers, these ones were gray, and put them inside the folder instead. They worked fast, like they'd practiced this before. The shorter man closed the folder and both of them took deep breaths. "Done," the tall one said. "He'll never know." They rushed past Emma without even glancing at her. To them, she didn't exist. She was just part of the furniture, invisible like her mama always was. But Emma's heart was pounding. She didn't understand exactly what she'd seen, but she knew it felt wrong. Her mama's words echoed in her head. "Important papers can change everything, sweetheart. People's jobs, their families, their whole lives. Emma stared at the hallway where the men had disappeared. She felt scared and confused. But somewhere deep inside, she knew she'd just witnessed something bad, something that needed to be told. Minutes later, the elevator at the end of the hall made a soft chiming sound. The doors opened and a man stepped out. Even a 5-year-old could tell he was important. He was tall, with dark hair starting to gray at the temples, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Emma's mama earned in a year. His name was William Richardson, and he owned the entire company. William walked with confidence, his eyes on his phone, completely absorbed in whatever message he was reading. He would have walked right past Emma without noticing her at all. But then he heard something, a small frightened sound, a child trying not to cry. He stopped and looked down. There she was, this tiny girl in a red dress, her blue eyes wide with fear and worry. Something about her expression made him pause. In his world of board meetings and business deals, he'd learned to read people's faces. And this child's face was screaming that something was terribly wrong. William slipped his phone into his pocket and walked over to her, moving slowly so he wouldn't scare her more. He crouched down to her level, something he almost never did for anyone. "Hey there," he said gently. "Are you okay?" Emma looked at him, and for a moment she couldn't speak. This man seemed too important, too powerful. What if she got in trouble? What if no one believed her? But then she remembered her mama's voice. "Always tell the truth, baby girl. Always." Emma took a shaky breath, and in a voice barely louder than a whisper, she said the words that would change everything. "I saw them switch the folder. The one with the red stripe. They said you'd never notice." William Richardson froze. Time seemed to stop, and in that moment, everything began to shift for him, for Emma, for everyone in that glass tower reaching toward the sky. William stayed perfectly still, processing what this little girl had just told him. His mind was racing, but his face remained calm. He'd built a billion-dollar empire by staying cool under pressure, by thinking 3 steps ahead. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. A child's whispered warning in an empty hallway. He lowered himself onto one knee so he could look directly into Emma's frightened eyes. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "can you tell me exactly what you saw?" Emma's hands gripped the edge of her chair. She was terrified, but something about this man's voice made her feel safer. "There were 2 men," she began, her voice shaking. "One was really tall and kept looking around like he was scared. The other one had a folder with a red line on it." William's jaw tightened. He knew exactly which folder she meant. The red stripe marked confidential merger documents, papers he was supposed to sign in less than an hour, papers that would finalize a deal worth $9 billion. "What did they do with the folder?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle, even though his heart was pounding. "They opened it," Emma continued, her words coming faster now, "and they took out the white papers and put them in a pocket. Then they put different papers inside, gray ones. And they said," she paused, her eyes filling with tears, "they said you wouldn't find out." William felt ice run through his veins. This wasn't just corporate espionage. This was betrayal from the inside, carefully planned and executed. If Emma hadn't been sitting right there, if she hadn't been brave enough to speak up, he would have signed those forged documents without question. The consequences would have been catastrophic. He reached out slowly and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing telling me," he said firmly. "You're not in trouble. In fact, you just helped me more than you can possibly understand." Emma blinked at him, surprised. "Really? Really?" William said. He stood up and looked down the hallway, his mind already forming a plan. Then he looked back at Emma. "What's your name?" "Emma," she whispered. "Emma, I need you to stay with me for a little while. Okay? I need to find your mom and make sure you're safe." He held out his hand, not demanding she take it, just offering. After a moment's hesitation, Emma placed her tiny hand in his large one. As they walked toward his office, William's mind was working furiously. He pressed a button on his phone. "Security to my office immediately," he said, his voice cold and commanding. "And find Grace Harper. Tell her to come right now. Her daughter is with me and she's safe." When they reached his office, a massive space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, Emma's eyes went wide with wonder. She'd never seen anything so grand. William guided her to a leather chair, and she climbed onto it, her feet dangling high above the ground. Within minutes, his office filled with people. Security guards with serious faces, his legal team with laptops and worried expressions. And then, Grace burst through the door, her face pale with panic. "Emma!" she cried, rushing to her daughter. "Baby, are you okay? What happened?" Emma jumped down from the chair and ran into her mother's arms. Grace held her tight, looking at William with confusion and fear in her eyes. "Mr. Richardson, I'm so sorry if she got in the way. I told her to sit quietly. William held up a hand, stopping her. "Your daughter did nothing wrong. In fact, she may have just saved this entire company." Grace stared at him, not understanding. "She witnessed a crime," William explained. "Two employees tampering with confidential documents. Documents I was about to sign." He looked at Emma, still clinging to her mother. "If she hadn't told me, the damage would have been irreversible." The security chief stepped forward. "Sir, we've pulled the surveillance footage. We found them." William's eyes hardened. "Show me." They played the video on a large screen. Emma watched from her mother's arms as the two men appeared on camera, doing exactly what she described. The tall, nervous one and the shorter one with the folder, switching papers when they thought no one was watching. But someone had been watching. A little girl in a red dress who understood that wrong was wrong, even when adults thought no one would notice. "Those are junior executives," the security chief said quietly. "Trevor Banks and Daniel Pierce. They've been with the company for 3 years. "Not anymore," William said, his voice like steel. "Have them arrested. Call the police. This is corporate fraud, and I want them prosecuted to the full extent of the law." As security rushed out to apprehend the men, William turned back to Grace and Emma. Grace was trembling, overwhelmed by everything happening so fast. She'd spent years being invisible, just another worker nobody noticed. And now the owner of the company was looking at her like she mattered. "Miss Harper," William said, his voice softer now, "I owe you and your daughter more than just thanks." Emma showed extraordinary courage today. She spoke up when it would have been easier to stay quiet. That's rare even in adults. Grace hugged Emma tighter. "I just taught her to tell the truth, sir. That's all." "That's everything," William replied. He looked at Emma, who was peeking at him from her mother's shoulder. "Emma, you're a hero. Do you understand that?" Emma shook her head, not understanding how she could be a hero when she'd just been sitting in a chair. William smiled, a real smile, the first genuine one in longer than he could remember. "You saved thousands of people's jobs today, including your mother's. You saved families and futures, all because you were honest and brave." For the first time, Emma smiled back, a small shy smile that lit up her entire face. And in that moment, William Richardson felt something crack open inside his chest, something that had been locked away for years behind meetings and money and power. He felt human again, connected to something real. The truth had come to light, brought there by the smallest, quietest voice in the building. And nothing would ever be the same again. That night, William Richardson couldn't sleep. He sat in his penthouse apartment, 40 stories above the city, staring out at the glittering lights below. Usually, this view made him feel powerful, like a king surveying his kingdom. But tonight, it just made him feel small. He kept thinking about Emma, about her frightened face and trembling voice, about how she'd been brave enough to speak up when two grown men with expensive suits and years of experience had been cowards, sneaking around and betraying everything they'd been trusted with. But more than that, he thought about how close he'd come to walking right past her. How many times had he walked through that building without seeing the people who kept it running? The cleaners, the security guards, the maintenance workers. They were invisible to him, just part of the background. Grace Harper had worked in his building for 7 years. 7 years. And until today, he'd never known her name. That realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He'd built his entire empire on being observant, on noticing details others missed, on staying 3 steps ahead. But somehow he'd stopped seeing people. He'd stopped seeing anything except deals and dollars and the next big win. A 5-year-old girl had shown him what he'd become, and he didn't like it. The next morning, William arrived at work before sunrise. He called an emergency meeting with his entire executive team, 12 people who helped run different parts of his company. They gathered in the conference room, confused about why they'd been summoned so early. William stood at the head of the long table, his hands clasped behind his back. "Yesterday," he began, "this company almost collapsed. A $9 billion deal almost fell apart because 2 employees decided to commit fraud." The executives shifted uncomfortably, exchanging worried glances. "But we didn't collapse," William continued. "We were saved by someone nobody in this room has ever met. Someone who makes minimum wage cleaning our offices. Or rather, her 5-year-old daughter." He told them the story, every detail. The switched papers, Emma's quiet observation, her courage to speak up. Some of the executives looked skeptical. How could a child understand corporate documents? But William had the security footage, the evidence, the confession from the 2 men who'd already been arrested. "Here's what haunts me," William said, his voice dropping lower. "That little girl noticed something wrong because she was paying attention. She was sitting in our hallway, a place she never should have been, watching the world around her with clear eyes. Meanwhile he gestured around the table, walk through this building every single day and see nothing. We don't see the people who keep these lights on, who keep these floors clean, who make sure we can do our jobs." The room was silent. "That ends today," William declared. "I want a full review of how we treat every single employee in this company. I want to know if people feel valued, if they feel safe speaking up, if they believe their voices matter. Because if a 5-year-old can save this company while we're too busy to notice, we're doing something fundamentally wrong." One executive raised a tentative hand. "What do you want us to do about the Harper woman and her daughter?" William had been waiting for this question. "Grace Harper gets a new contract. Full-time position, better hours, triple her current salary. Her daughter gets enrolled in our educational scholarship program. Full coverage from now through college if she wants it. I'll personally oversee it." "Sir," another executive spoke up carefully, "that's very generous. But is it wise to set that precedent? Other employees might." "Other employees might what?" William interrupted, his voice sharp. "Might expect to be treated with dignity? Might expect loyalty in return for their loyalty? Good. They should." He looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes. "I started this company 20 years ago with nothing. Somewhere along the way, I forgot what that felt like. I forgot that every person in this building is someone's parent, someone's child, someone's whole world. Emma reminded me of that, and I'm not going to forget again." The meeting ended in uncomfortable silence. Some executives left inspired. Others left worried about what this shift in priorities might mean. But William didn't care. For the first time in years, he knew he was doing something right. Later that morning, he called Grace and Emma back to his office. When they arrived, Grace looked nervous, probably expecting him to take back everything he'd promised. People in her position had learned not to trust good news. But William had prepared something special. "Emma," he said, kneeling down to her level again, "I want to show you something." He led her to the window, the massive glass wall that overlooked the entire city. The morning sun was breaking through the clouds, painting the buildings in shades of gold and pink. "See all those buildings?" William asked softly. "There are people in every single one of them. Thousands and thousands of people. They're working, taking care of their families, trying to make their lives better. And yesterday, you helped me protect many of those people." Emma pressed her hands against the glass, looking out with wide eyes. "How?" "The papers those men switched would have caused something called a merger to fail," William explained, choosing his words carefully. That's when two companies joined together. If it had failed the way they planned, a lot of people would have lost their jobs. But because you told the truth, we caught them in time. Everyone's safe now. Oh, Emma breathed, processing this. Then she looked up at him with sudden concern. Are you still sad? William blinked, surprised by her perception. Why do you think I'm sad? Because grown-ups who don't smile much are usually sad, Emma said simply. My mama says some people forget how to be happy. Out of the mouths of babes, William thought. This child saw right through him. You're right, he admitted. I had forgotten, but you're helping me remember. Grace watched this exchange with tears in her eyes. She'd never seen anyone powerful speak to her daughter like this. Like Emma's thoughts and feelings mattered just as much as anyone else's. William stood and turned to Grace. I meant what I said yesterday. Your new contract is being drawn up. You'll also have access to childcare services, health insurance, and paid time off. Real paid time off. Not the kind you're too afraid to use. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. Mr. Richardson, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, William replied. Your daughter already said everything that needed to be said. She told the truth when it mattered most. That's worth more than any business deal I've ever made. He reached into his desk and pulled out a small box. Inside was a silver necklace with a pendant shaped like a star. He handed it to Emma. This is for you, he said. To remind you that even the smallest light can shine in the darkness. You were that light for me, Emma. Don't ever stop shining. Emma held the necklace like it was made of diamonds, her eyes sparkling with joy. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, she whispered. And in that moment, William Richardson, billionaire, CEO, master of industry, learned something profound. True wealth wasn't measured in money or power. It was measured in moments like this. In the smile of a child who'd been brave, in the tears of a mother who'd been seen, in the simple revolutionary act of treating people like they mattered. He'd spent 20 years climbing to the top of the world. But it took falling to his knees in front of a 5-year-old girl to understand what the view from up there should really look like. Word spread through Richardson Global like wildfire. Whispers in break rooms, conversations by the coffee machines, shocked exchanges in elevators. Did you hear? The owner's daughter saved the company. No, not his daughter. Cleaner's kid. A 5-year-old. She saw something and spoke up. Everything's changing now. The story grew with each telling, becoming almost mythical. Some details got exaggerated, but the heart of it remained true. A little girl had done what grown men wouldn't do. She'd chosen honesty over silence. But the real changes happening at Richardson Global went deeper than gossip. William Richardson started doing something he'd never done before. Walking through the building, not rushing to meetings or buried in his phone, but actually walking, stopping, talking to people. He learned names, asked questions, listened to answers. He met James, the 60-year-old security guard who'd worked the night shift for 12 years and never once called in sick. He met Patricia, who managed the mailroom and knew every employee's name by heart. He met Roberto, the maintenance supervisor, who'd been quietly fixing problems before anyone else noticed they existed. These people had been invisible to him. Now he saw them clearly, and he was ashamed it had taken so long. The executive team, following William's lead, began implementing real changes. Anonymous feedback systems where employees could voice concerns without fear. Better wages across the board, especially for support staff. A genuine open-door policy that meant something more than empty words. Some of the old guard executives resisted. We're coddling people, one complained in a private meeting. This isn't sustainable. William's response was swift and cold. What's not sustainable is treating human beings like machines. If you can't adapt to that, there are plenty of other companies that will appreciate your outdated approach. This one isn't for you anymore. 2 executives resigned within the month. William didn't try to stop them. He was rebuilding something, not just a company, but a culture. And it started with remembering that every person who walked through those doors carried a life, a family, a story worth respecting. Meanwhile, Emma and Grace were adjusting to their new reality. Grace still couldn't believe it was real. She'd moved from night shifts to day shifts, working regular hours in a newly created role coordinating facilities management. The pay was more than she'd ever dreamed of earning. For the first time in Emma's life, Grace didn't have to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. She could do both. She could even save money. The weight that had pressed on her shoulders for so long, the constant fear of one unexpected expense destroying everything, began to lift. Emma, for her part, handled the changes with the resilient adaptability of childhood. She'd started a special after-school program that the company provided, where she could do homework, play, and just be a kid in a safe environment until her mama finished work. She made friends with other employees' children, turned the common area into an imaginary kingdom, and brought joy to a building that had forgotten what joy looked like. But the biggest change was in how people looked at her. They didn't look through her anymore. They saw her. They smiled. They said hello. Security guards high-fived her when she walked past. Executives waved from conference room windows. She'd become a symbol, proof that doing the right thing mattered, that speaking up could change everything. One afternoon, about a month after everything happened, William invited Emma to his office again. This had become a weekly ritual. She'd visit, they'd talk, and somehow those conversations with a 5-year-old gave him more clarity than most board meetings ever had. Emma bounced into his office wearing a yellow dress covered in sunflowers, her star necklace catching the light. "Hi, Mr. William," she called out cheerfully. She'd started calling him that after he told her Mr. Richardson felt too formal for friends. "Hello, Emma," William said, genuine warmth in his voice. "I have something to show you." He pulled up a presentation on his large computer screen. It showed graphs and numbers, but he'd added pictures to help Emma understand. "See this?" He pointed to a chart. "This shows how many people work here. Almost 3,000. Emma's eyes went wide. "That's so many." "It is," William agreed. "And because of what you did, because you were brave enough to tell the truth, all 3,000 of these people still have their jobs. They can still take care of their families. Their kids can still go to school. Do you understand what that means?" Emma thought about it carefully, her little face serious. "It means lots of mamas and daddies aren't worried." "Exactly," William said softly. "Lots of mamas and daddies aren't worried. Because of you." Emma looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "Mr. William, can I ask you something?" "Anything. Why didn't the other grown-ups see what I saw?" "Don't grown-ups see everything?" William felt that question hit him square in the chest. He thought about how to answer honestly without destroying a 5-year-old's faith in adults. "The truth is," he said slowly, "grown-ups sometimes stop paying attention. We get busy and tired. We start thinking we know everything, so we stop really looking. But you reminded me of something important. We should always keep our eyes open. We should always pay attention to what's really happening, not just what we expect to see." Emma nodded solemnly, as if accepting the responsibility of teaching adults how to see again. "Emma," William continued, "I'm going to tell you something I want you to remember forever. You're going to grow up, go to school, maybe go to college someday. You're going to meet all kinds of people. Some kind, some not so kind. Some honest, some not so honest. But I need you to promise me something." "What?" Emma asked, leaning forward. "Promise me you'll always stay exactly who you are right now. Someone who tells the truth even when it's scary. Someone who speaks up when something's wrong. Someone who pays attention when others look away. The world needs more people like you, Emma. Don't let anyone convince you to be less honest, less observant, less brave. Okay?" Emma's eyes were serious, thoughtful beyond her years. "Okay," she said. "I promise." They pinky swore on it, and William felt something settle in his chest, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He'd made billions of dollars, closed countless deals, built an empire. But helping this little girl understand her worth and protecting her innate goodness felt more important than all of it. As Emma skipped out of his office that day, chattering to her mother about the charts and graphs, William stood at his window overlooking the city. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. He thought about how one moment, one child, one whispered truth had changed absolutely everything. The ripples were still spreading outward, touching lives in ways he was only beginning to understand. And for the first time in his adult life, William Richardson felt something he'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Not hope for profit margins or market share, but hope for something better, something real, something that mattered. All because a little girl in a red dress had refused to stay silent when silence would have been easier. 6 months passed. Chicago winter gave way to spring, and the city bloomed with new life. But the biggest transformation wasn't in the trees or the weather. It was in the glass tower that housed Richardson Global. The culture shift that had started with Emma's brave words had taken deep root. Employee satisfaction scores had skyrocketed. Productivity was up. But more importantly, something intangible had changed. The building felt different, warmer, more human. People smiled at each other in elevators. They held doors. They remembered birthdays. They acted like a community instead of a collection of strangers competing for the same resources. William Richardson walked through his company now and saw it with new eyes. He'd thought he was building something impressive before, a monument to success, a temple to ambition. But he'd actually been building something hollow, beautiful on the outside, empty on the inside. Now he was building something real, and it showed in unexpected ways. The cleaning staff no longer worked invisible night shifts. They were integrated into the day, their work valued and visible. The security team had been given raises and better training. The entire support staff structure had been redesigned to recognize that these weren't just background workers. They were the foundation everything else was built on. And people noticed. News outlets ran stories about the culture transformation at Richardson Global. Business schools wanted to study what William had done. Other companies tried to copy it, though most missed the point. You couldn't fake genuine respect for human dignity. You either believed people mattered or you didn't. William believed it now. Emma had taught him to believe it. On a bright Saturday morning in May, William did something unprecedented. He threw a company-wide celebration, not for investors or clients, but for employees and their families. He rented out an entire park, brought in food trucks and carnival games, hired musicians and face painters. 3,000 employees and their families showed up, transforming the green space into a sea of laughter and joy. William spent the day walking around, shaking hands, meeting people's children, learning their stories. He saw Roberto teaching his grandson to throw a baseball. He watched Patricia dancing with her husband, celebrating their 40th anniversary. He listened to James, the security guard, talk proudly about his daughter who just graduated from nursing school. These were his people, not his employees, his people. And he'd almost lost all of them because he'd been too blind to see 2 criminals switching papers right under his nose. But then he spotted Emma. She was playing on the swings, her yellow dress flying behind her as she soared higher and higher, her laughter ringing out like music. Grace sat on a bench nearby, watching her daughter with a soft smile, looking more relaxed than William had ever seen her. He walked over and sat beside Grace. "She's happy," he observed. "She is," Grace agreed. "We both are. Mr. Richardson, I still can't believe how much you've done for us. Sometimes I wake up thinking it's all a dream." "It's not a dream," William said. "It's what should have been happening all along. I'm just sorry it took so long for me to wake up and see it." Grace looked at him thoughtfully. "Emma talks about you all the time. She thinks you're a superhero." William laughed, but it was tinged with humility. "I'm not the superhero in this story. She is. She's the one who saved everyone. I was just smart enough to listen when she spoke. She told me something interesting the other day," Grace continued. "She said you were sad before, but you're not sad anymore. Is that true?" William watched Emma on the swings, her joy so pure and uncomplicated. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It's true. I was sad for a long time without even realizing it. I thought success would fill something inside me, but it just made the emptiness bigger. Your daughter showed me what actually matters. People, connection, truth. The simple stuff I'd forgotten about while chasing complicated things. Grace reached over and squeezed his hand. Thank you for seeing her, for seeing us. Not everyone would have. I almost didn't, William admitted. I almost walked right past her that day. Sometimes I have nightmares about what would have happened if I had. But you didn't, Grace said firmly. You stopped. You listened. You believed her. That's what matters. Emma jumped off the swing at the peak of its arc, flying through the air for one perfect moment before landing in the grass with a giggle. She spotted William and came running over, her face flushed with happiness. Mr. William, did you see me? I went so high. I saw you, William said, grinning. You were flying. Emma plopped down on the grass in front of them, breathing hard from exertion and excitement. This is the best day ever, she announced. Everyone's so happy. They are, William agreed. And you know what? They're happy because of you. Emma tilted her head, confused. Because of me? Because of you, William confirmed. When you told the truth that day, you didn't just save the company. You reminded everyone here, including me, what really matters. You taught us to pay attention, to care about each other, to speak up when something's wrong. This whole day, all these happy people, it started with your courage. Emma thought about this, then smiled her brightest smile. I'm glad I told you, she said simply. So am I, William said. More than you'll ever know. As the sun began to set over the park, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, William stood at the edge of the celebration and watched his people, his community, laughing and playing and simply being together. Families, friends, colleagues who'd become something more than just coworkers. This was wealth. This was success. This was what the view from the top was supposed to look like. He thought about the version of himself from 6 months ago. The man who'd been so focused on deals and dollars that he'd forgotten to see the people making those deals possible. That man would have been horrified by this party, would have seen it as inefficient, unnecessary, a waste of resources. That man had been a fool. Emma appeared beside him, slipping her small hand into his large one. She didn't say anything, just stood there holding his hand and watching the sunset. Emma, William said softly, can I tell you something? Aha! You changed my life. You saved more than just my company. You saved me. Emma looked up at him with those clear, honest blue eyes. You're not sad anymore. No, William said, and realized it was completely true. I'm not sad anymore. Good, Emma said matter-of-factly. Then she hugged his leg, because that was as high as she could reach, and ran off to play again. William watched her go. This little girl in a yellow dress who'd had the courage to speak truth to power, who'd trusted him enough to tell him something frightening, who'd reminded him how to be human again. The business world would remember this story as the time a major corporate fraud was prevented by an unlikely witness. The headlines would focus on the dramatic arrests, the near-miss disaster, the millions of dollars saved. But William would remember it differently. He'd remember the moment he stopped being a billionaire first and became a human being again. He'd remember learning to see the people who'd been invisible. He'd remember understanding, finally, that real leadership wasn't about being the smartest or the richest or the most powerful. Real leadership was about listening to a 5-year-old girl when she whispered that something was wrong, and believing her enough to act. As night fell over the park and families began heading